Hi, everyone. Welcome to this IDA Insight Hour. We're just giving everyone a couple of minutes to join, and then we will be off. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're just giving everyone a couple of minutes to join before we kick off the session. Great to see the numbers climbing up. We are just about to get started. All right, without further ado, welcome to today's IDA Insight Hour. I am Kristen Tua. I'm the Communications Manager at IDA. So we are the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse. We are a network of over 2,000 employer members across the UK. Our mission is to equip employers to support all of their employees impacted by domestic abuse and to share their best practice with other employers. We endeavour to bring about constructive change, leading to a society where survivors thrive and where domestic abuse is not tolerated. Today, we're tackling a topic that I'm sure many of you have seen in the media spotlight in recent months. The many ways that online harms pertaining to domestic abuse, sexual violence and harassment, and image-based abuse are influencing particularly young people are evolving very rapidly. And it can be hard to know exactly what trends are currently the most pressing, which is why we're delighted to be joined today by Everyone's Invited, who specialize in working with young people and those around them to recognize and respond to these harms. Now, I'm sure there are going to be many questions for Everyone's Invited, and we're going to be tackling your questions at the end. So please use the Q&A box as opposed to the chat to ask questions throughout the next hour. You also have access to the chat function, which is managed by one of the IDA team, and please feel free to post in the chat. And we encourage everyone to post about the webinar on LinkedIn and other social media platforms, so please tag us when you do. As ever, be mindful of the impact on others and what you choose to say in the chat and on social media. This Insight Hour is being recorded, and we're going to post the recording to our YouTube library tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. And now, without further ado, over to our speakers. Everyone's invited.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kristen. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much to IDA for having us. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully that works and everybody can see that. My name is Alex. I am the Head of Education at Everyone's Invited. I'm also joined by my two colleagues, Eleanor and Taliska, who will introduce themselves a little bit later on as they present their parts of the presentation. So just to kind of get started and just to sort of check in, the kind of content that we're going to be discussing today, it can be quite overwhelming. Maybe some topics you'll be really familiar with, maybe some you will be kind of have no familiarity whatsoever, but that's kind of what we're here for today, to kind of introduce those topics and really get you to understand, I guess, what is happening right now, how it's contributing to domestic abuse. So just first of all, this is a space for open, non-judgmental conversation. Feel free to ask any question at all, to kind of share anything that you would like to, but also don't feel that pressure to share as well. Check in with yourself. If at any point you need to pop us on mute or just go for a breather, obviously completely fine. And the biggest thing we're asking from everyone today is to come in with an open mind and an open heart. We're here to help you. We're here to hopefully educate you and hopefully kind of work together on the sorts of issues that we're going to talk about today. So, who are we? What are everyone's invited? It'd be really great, maybe just in the chat, for you to write yes or no. Yes, if you are familiar with us. No, if you're not familiar with us. It's always kind of interesting to see kind of who has heard of us before. For those that have no kind of understanding about what everyone's invited is, we are a charity that was set up about 6 years ago now in the summer of 2020. We were set up by our CEO and co-founder, Soma Sara, who is on the top right-hand side of that picture there. About 6 years ago, Soma shared her own experiences of sexual assault and sexual harassment that she had experienced herself, and also kind of commented on the fact that these behaviors have become so normal in her own kind of school education and sort of daily life and university as well. She shared her experience, and this kind of snowballed into hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of people coming to our website, everyone's invited, and submitting their own anonymous testimonies. And we also received a big influx of testimonies speaking about experiences of domestic abuse. From then until now, the work that we've done with those incredible and powerful testimonies is we started to educate people using that research. We now work with students, parents, carers, teachers, and have started to work with employers and employees, kind of starting these conversations, but also helping to educate people. I think a lot of people have questions about why these sorts of behaviors are happening. How are they changing when it comes to kind of AI and digital kind of progression? So that's kind of what we see as ourselves as those educators, those kind of pioneers when it comes to starting these conversations. And hopefully that's what we're going to give you a bit of an insight and some support with today. So, a little bit of interactivity. If you scan this QR code, you will be able to answer this question, and your answer will pop up on the screen for everyone to see. And the question is, what topics should employers better support parents and carers with? So, it could be pretty much anything, maybe that you're thinking of, things that you feel like are lacking within your own workplace, maybe some things that you have questions about that you are struggling to find resources for and help for. So we've got how to have these conversations at work. Definitely. I think these conversations are difficult to do even just like in a personal setting amongst families. So I think definitely that is something that we could definitely discuss around how to have those conversations in that setting and work as well. Signposting to resources. We're going to share with you all of our fantastic resources that we've developed. What support employees can expect, 100%. What are young people experiencing? Amazing. Wow, thank you all for doing this. It's so interesting to see. I'm really happy someone put what are young people experiencing, because that's definitely something that we are going to kind of look into and talk about today. Fantastic. I'm going to move on just for time, but we've got lots more of these kind of questions and interactive moments. So you'll have your chance again to kind of interact with the presentation. There we go. I'm just going to pass over now to Eleanor.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. My name's Eleanor. I also work on the education team at Everyone's Invited, and super excited to be here today. So the purpose of this slide is to just give you guys, I guess, a little bit of a context of why we're here. You might think of us as a charity that predominantly works in schools, works with young people. I'm going to kind of lay out a little bit more of a context of why we're here and the kind of collaboration that we want to have with you guys too. But first, I think it's important to set a little bit of a context. Now, we know that domestic abuse, it doesn't happen in isolation. And often, if we're thinking about young people's experiences, they are not necessarily going out there and expecting to experience this or expecting to perpetrate something like this either. Now, what we like to do is to think about the building blocks that lead to actions like this and lead to this kind of level of violence, unfortunately. And what can we do to kind of stop these things, or to have conversations about maybe these things that seem like small things, perhaps they're like small acts of sexism or harassment, or even the kind of media that we might come across, and how we can kind of unpick those and help support each other with what attitudes they give us, and how we can reduce the normalization of a lot of these really unhealthy and abusive behaviors. Now, to talk a little bit more, I guess, of why we're here and what we do. we are here today to kind of have a bit of a two-pronged approach. So we are here to support employees who are parents and carers and perhaps thinking about how their young people are navigating the world. But we also really believe it's so important to help employers like yourself with young employees that may be facing these forms of domestic abuse, or these employees that are parents and carers that are experiencing it with their young people as well. So we're here to kind of offer this quite holistic approach, hopefully, draw on a lot of our experiences of working with parents, carers, employers, employees, and also experiencing a lot of kind of work with young people too, and hopefully giving you a really well-rounded kind of approach of what we can do to offer support.
Amazing. So on the screen here, I've got one of the testimonies, one of the 50,000 testimonies that was submitted to our website. I'm going to read this out. Obviously, if you prefer to put me on mute, that's absolutely fine. But I thought it would just be good to kind of start us off with this. I was in a relationship with this guy and had previously had sex with him. However, one night I got really drunk and he hadn't had one sip of alcohol. We had sex, even though I remember not wanting it. It felt like he took advantage of how drunk I was, and that because he was my boyfriend, he had the right. I never reported it because what can I say? I was in a relationship and felt that because of this, it wouldn't be considered rape. It's been almost 10 years, and still to this day, it's hard to think about. I know I didn't want it, and I remember feeling like I've been taken advantage of. I still can't put into words what the feeling is. This, like so many other of the testimonies on our website, I guess really highlights the sort of gaps in knowledge when it comes to consent, sexual violence, domestic abuse. And this is also where we get a lot of our insight and where we do a lot of our research, is by going through all of these testimonies to really get an understanding of what young people are experiencing and hopefully start to fill those gaps of knowledge. We also had a lot of experiences, or a lot of testimonies submitted to our website, that were from people at primary school level. If you are familiar with us, you might be familiar with our primary school campaign that we did last year, where we kind of highlighted the fact that, you know, when we talk about these issues, it's really hard to imagine that children this young are experiencing these things. But they are being exposed to things on social media. And we don't say that to kind of scare or fearmonger. We say that because we want to be realistic, but we also want to support parents and carers of children at a primary school level as well, and let them know that we're also here for them to help them kind of start those conversations and really start those building blocks around kind of boundaries and consent, and having these conversations with their children as well.
So why else are we here? So we know that young people are experiencing these issues, which can be an incredibly hard thing to think about, but it's even harder for those parents and carers of these young people that, you know, worry about their children, worry about their young people in their homes. And naturally, we know that when we go to work, we don't just leave everything at the door of our house and think, okay, well, we're going to compartmentalize that and never think about it in the workplace. Obviously, we're only human. These worries follow us to work as well. And as parent and carers, this can have a really detrimental effect on our work output, on our work lives, and on our mental health as well. So as employers, we know how important it is to be able to offer that support and that understanding of what young people could be experiencing and what these parent and carers can be experiencing as well. And we know, you know, this also does have a financial effect on, you know, employers and businesses as well, costing even £8 billion. This was a study done by Deloitte in 2024. They found that, you know, parents and carers having to take time off of work, leaving their roles, or having impact on their performance can really financially, you know, cost employers as well. So it's important that we understand these issues that parents and carers could be coming to work with. Now, we know that not only do you as employers employ people who are parents and carers who might be having young people experiencing these issues, we also know that, you know, employers are employing young people too, whether that's in apprenticeships or graduates or even early career employees. And we know that some of these employees, by definition, can be facing domestic abuse. Now, by definition, you know, a young person in primary school, say, isn't experiencing it directly to themselves, but it doesn't mean that those building blocks aren't there. And we need to be aware of how, you know, the online world and a lot of the new kind of things happening within social media, incel culture, and all of those kind of things. I might have just thrown out some crazy buzzwords, which we're going to address later on, luckily. But I think it's important for us to kind of acknowledge that this is an issue that young people do experience, and your young people coming into the workplaces are maybe going to be experiencing forms of domestic abuse that might feel quite alien to you. So, to kind of summarize, we are here to help organizations support parents and carers, but also to support these young people entering the workplace. We know that, parents and carers can feel lost, they can feel anxious when it comes to kind of talking about these topics, how it might affect them at work. We want to empower you as employers, but also the parents and the carers in the room with this knowledge and this understanding that can empower these conversations with their young people, with their colleagues, with their employers to get the necessary support and to even prevent future harm. And we know that as parents and carers or young people who possibly are experiencing domestic abuse are supported more by their employers, the best, kind of outcome at work can be. So it's really interesting to think about how, just beginning to start these conversations and to be educated on these different issues can have amazing effects for your kind of businesses as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So to introduce myself, my name's Taliska. I'm the facilitation lead at Everyone's Invited. So my primary role in the organisation is to deliver our education programmes, whether that is in primary schools, secondary schools, colleges, universities, and of course workplaces. And I primarily do a lot of work with parents and carers as well. So we've already got people typing, which is absolutely brilliant. But what I would love you to do, as you can see on the screen, again, using Slido, is to think about what kind of trends online are you hearing about, perhaps seeing, maybe even speaking to your young people or your children about that worry you. And if you're not a parent and carer yourselves, what are the sorts of topics you're seeing perhaps in the news or you're hearing colleagues discuss? I can see lots of them coming up now. AI, deepfake images, the manosphere. Some people even saying they're hearing these terms, as Ellen said, these almost buzzwords, but not necessarily knowing exactly what they mean. OnlyFans, TikTok challenges. Okay, very interestingly, and Slido thankfully does this for us, we can see the kind of dominant themes coming out, which is the manosphere and then also AI in general. And we're going to talk today a little bit about how AI is overlapping with things like pornography and other forms of abuse, like image-based abuse. So at the very start of this academic year, so back in September, I sent out, on behalf of Everyone's Invited and our team, a survey to parents and carers across the country to really do what we just did there, to dissect what issues are they concerned about, what is worrying them, what do they want more support with. And to speak to what many of you have just typed into the chat, you can see it's been reflected across the country. Social media is a big concern, of course, pornography, and that intersection with AI, so things like deepfakes, online misogyny, which we might hear referred to as the manosphere, consent and abusive relationships, and of course, domestic abuse, and also influencers and the role that they play across all of those other topics. So what we're going to do now is deep dive a little bit. I say deep dive within the time parameters that we have, but sort of introduce you to some of these topics and the work that we do based on our research from testimonies, but also day in, day out, working with young people who very thankfully share this with us.
Okay, so one of the biggest kind of things that were coming up there in the Slido is maybe being concerned about the manosphere or online misogyny. Could I also maybe just see in the chat, could you put yes or no if you have seen the recent Louis Theroux Inside the Manosphere documentary? I'm assuming probably going to get a lot of yeses. This conversation, or I guess this topic, we have been speaking about online misogyny and the manosphere since actually 2022. And it's great to see kind of this conversation becoming a bit more mainstream and more people paying attention to it. And I think now when I used to walk into a room and do a training and talk about incels, people would look at me like I was genuinely insane. Whereas now I think now there's a bit more of a discussion around it and people do sort of know and understand what these things are. However, it's still massively impacting and affecting young people. I think the biggest thing that we're kind of seeing, especially within schools, is this kind of divide forming between young boys and young girls, with kind of, I guess, quite extreme content being shared to both to all young people that's kind of causing this sort of divide. And we talk about the manosphere. A lot of it just relates back to these like outdated gendered pressures, that what a lot of these influencers are doing are just pushing young boys and men and adult men into these kind of really stereotypical, really small kind of boxes around what it is to be a man. Kind of some buzzwords there on the screen. We've got things like pickup artists, and incels. And also thinking about conspiracy theories and the Matrix. I also saw someone mention just in the chat around the recent also Ross Kemp documentary. We actually featured in that documentary, I think we're in episode 3 or 4. They actually came with us to a school and filmed us doing one of the talks. So yeah, if you do go back and watch that, have a look for my face in it doing a talk at one of the schools. But yeah, it's really great to see these conversations start. But as I was kind of saying, going back to gendered pressures, that is really where the work can begin, of really dismantling those stereotypes, how we view each other, how we view ourselves, and focusing on that character work is really, really important.
Okay, so moving over to social media, because we can't deny that this is having a huge influence on what Alex was talking about, these expectations and these pressures, which really are those building blocks to those more harmful behaviors, which lead to young people experiencing domestic abuse and also sexual violence as well. So one of the biggest platforms that young people are using is Snapchat. We're going to talk about TikTok next as well. Those are the two dominant platforms. And I think for a lot of parents and carers, you know, there's a lot of fear around Snapchat because most of us don't have it at our age. Even I had it when I was a teenager, but now I don't have it anymore. And what we know is that Snapchat is a quite dominant vehicle for a lot of domestic abuse to happen. You can see here that a lot of perpetrators of intimate partner violence will misuse these types of platforms to harass, to control, to isolate, and to commit acts of abuse, even after relationships end. And very interestingly, I was at a school a couple of weeks ago, training some safeguarding leads there. And this is a quotation from one of those safeguarding leads. They said it's so normal now for them to track each other's locations. They have everyone's location on Snapchat. So you can see again how these technologies, which are being used at such a high rate, they're spending a lot of their day on here, is being used to perpetrate a lot of domestic abuse. For example, here you can see Snap Maps, which is a feature within Snapchat, which plots all of your friends on the map. And by default, you can see everyone's location unless you put it onto what's called ghost mode. But actually, a lot of parents wouldn't even know about this feature, of course, if you don't have the app yourself. But even these small tools, speaking to your, your young people, your children about these features and saying, look, pop this feature on so that no one can see your location, because this is where we can start to see these controlling behaviors coming through and where abuse can start to happen and can manifest over time.
Okay, so everyone's second favorite social media app, TikTok. Again, I'd love to see in the chat maybe just a yes or a no if you have TikTok. Maybe if you have it and also actively use it. This is a safe space, no judgment. I'll hold my hands up. I do have TikTok. If you don't have TikTok and you have no idea how this app works, it's really interesting. It's a social media app, and when you download the app, you don't actually have to follow anyone. You get shown something called a For You page. So when you start using it, you'll just kind of be shown like an endless seam of random videos. The more that you use the app, the algorithm on TikTok will start to remember videos that you're liking, videos that you're watching a few times, maybe videos that you're sending to a friend. It then tries to show you videos that it thinks that you will like. So kind of remembering kind of what you're engaging with. It's kind of the same sort of algorithm on Instagram Reels as well. We've got any Instagram Reels users in the chat. And a lovely example of this is my dad, who always sends me on Instagram Reels loads of like cooking videos and recipe videos. So I'm pretty sure that like that's the only corner of the internet that he is on, which I really hope stays that way. And maybe not very nice example is someone being exposed to harmful online trends and then kind of getting pushed down into this echo chamber and only seeing one type of opinion, one type of influencer, or kind of one way of thinking. We meet so many people that I think are really in these echo chambers because of what they're being exposed to online. This is the same for like children, adults. I think all of us can be guilty of kind of ending up in these spaces. So for us, it's really important to kind of burst those bubbles and kind of talk about the fact that this is the way these apps work. work. When it comes to monitoring, and I think really this is a big conversation that we have with parents and carers of, okay, what do I do if my children are using these apps? How do I get them to like stop it, or how do I make sure they're being safe? Something I would always say is that if you do choose to monitor, is to disclose that with your children and be open with it as well. Reflecting back on kind of, you know, myself when I was a teenager, being told by my parents, like, we need to go through your phone, we need to see what you're doing. You have this immediate feeling of like, I've done something wrong. And I think it kind of causes a bit more secrecy. If you let them know that the reason I want to look is because I'm looking for this specific thing, or I want to make sure that you're not being exposed to this influencer, or I want to make sure that you're not in this echo chamber, that you're seeing different things, it kind of opens up a bit more of an honest conversation. We want to create an environment where young people come forward and just tell us these things, tell us things that they're seeing. But I think right now there is a lot of fear, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of stigma, and it's really about making sure we aren't making them feel guilty or shameful. We're encouraging them to come forward and ask us questions, show us things they've seen on their phone, and really just start a conversation and make sure it's not just a conversation happening on TikTok, but they're discussing these things with you in their families, in their homes, and also kind of at school and around their friends as well.
Brilliant. Before we talk a little bit about gaming, I just wanted to draw attention to Clive Turner. Thank you for your message in the chat about this idea of the persuader, and ghost mode and not being able to see other people's locations. So it almost actively encourages you to share this information. And Alex was just talking about TikTok. There's the same function on that, much like LinkedIn, where if you turn off people being able to see that you've gone on their profile, you also can't see who's visited yours. So you're right, there's also lots of tools and interesting elements to platforms which are designed to encourage you to share, to keep you hooked, to keep you engaged. So, when we're speaking to employees who are parents and carers, or employers themselves about these topics, we really delve into that nitty-gritty side of exactly what's going on with the algorithm in more detail as well. Now, I think another area which is really prominent in parents' minds is gaming, especially nowadays as well for children, even as young as 2, 3, 4 years old. I see very often young children on buses, on public transport, playing things like Roblox, which I'm going to talk about, and also games like Fortnite. You might be familiar or heard of both of them. I expect that many of you won't have played them before, but essentially they are online games. They're kind of almost like a universe with lots of different games within them. And Roblox especially is very popular, especially amongst younger children, because there is in fact no kind of age limit to go onto Roblox. Now, there are lots of online harms to be aware of, but because these games are progressing so rapidly and young people are using them, becoming familiar with them so quickly, it's really hard for parents and carers to keep up. But some interesting things to think about within these games is things like content and maturity settings. So these settings that perhaps on first glance might seem like they're there to promote safety, which perhaps they are, often have faults within them. So when we've gone and done research, for example, into games within Roblox, some of these games are created by the platform itself, but many of them are user generated, and they have this content maturity level, which is supposed to tell you, how mature this game is, who it's appropriate for. But in our research, we found that actually a lot of the games that are put at minimal levels of content maturity are in fact very harmful and might have, for example, explicit references within them or kind of suggestive content. Now, another big harm is that users are often encouraged to go off platform. So what that means is there might be safeguards within place within the game, but very often people that are grooming young children or trying to commit acts of abuse, what they will do is they will try to take them from that platform, which is child focused, and bring them onto other platforms like TikTok or like Snapchat. Now, there are many things that these gaming platforms do in terms of trying to block the sharing of personal information. You can see in that speech bubble there with all the hashtags, this person has tried to ask for personal information and the game has blocked it. But like many other platforms, there are loopholes. So you can see here, sending an upside down font allows that person to send that message through. And, as I've mentioned, there is a lot of suggestive content on there. There is a lot of ways that people are bypassing or using loopholes within this content. So when we're thinking about talking to parents and carers, of course, we're sharing this information with them. But really importantly, if your child or young person is on these games, thinking about things like making sure the volume is out loud as opposed to headsets, which are quite popular, keeping gaming consoles or even computers or iPads in communal spaces where you can hear what's going on, you can see what's going on. You can also see things like their body language, their responses to things. That's also very good indications of what's happening. And importantly, having these conversations. And this is why it's so important that we speak and we learn about these things, because it's very hard to have a conversation with a young person about a gaming platform or a specific game if you don't know the first thing about it. Of course, it's incredibly challenging. So really, we're here to empower parents and carers to understand what their children are experiencing, how these platforms work, and that makes it so much easier to enter these conversations with them.
Okay, fantastic. We're on to our next question now, which will open us up into our final section. I want you guys to kind of have a moment of reflection yourselves. This is something that obviously is a question that we like to speak to young people about when when we come into their schools and have conversations with them. But I think as adults, it's hard sometimes for us to reflect on our own experiences of these things. Often a lot of the online misogyny or a lot of the pressures that young people are facing that lead to these really harmful behaviors or things like domestic abuse, we find that, you know, they might feel very far away or very alien, but often they're just being repackaged or just kind of seen in a different way on the online world, when really, if we reflect on our own experiences, there's some things that really overlap there. So we've got on the screen only playing certain sports at school. Yes, this is a very common one. Manning up, shaving, having a phone as young as possible. Page 3, yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to think about how things like pornography have really kind of changed form. Skirt length, consent, over sexualized, losing your virginity by a certain age. Absolutely, girls should be pretty. School uniform different for girls and boys, a lot of things around body image as well, and a lot of body pressures. I think, again, as kind of employers or even parents in the room, this might feel like a very big leap of how have we got to this from kind of talking about domestic abuse. But if we reflect back on that pyramid graphic that we showed you at the beginning, a lot of these pressures that we face kind of growing up really add to a lot of these negative behaviors, or at least the normalization of these negative and harmful abusive behaviors later in life. So I think kind of reflecting on these building blocks can really help us start these conversations, and also come to them with a lot of empathy and understanding, even if you aren't an avid Roblox player yourself. Okay, thank you guys. So now I want to talk a little bit more about how these harmful binaries within kind of gendered pressures, I'm just going to wait for the slide change. Amazing. How a lot of these harmful binaries of, you know, what is masculine or what is feminine, what should a girl be, what should a boy be, they're very kind of specific. They put us into boxes as humans. Now, I'm sure everyone in this room, regardless of how you present your gender, have experienced this in some way growing up or even in adulthood, whether that's at school, in the workplace, on the street, in home. This is a very natural thing that we all experience, but often can actually lead to quite harmful behaviors. And unfortunately, these harmful binaries are increasing things like domestic abuse, things like sexual violence, things like harassment, because we are told from a young age that women should act in this way, men should act in this way, and that's just the way things should be. Now, as humans, we know that this isn't, you know, the way that things always happen. We are very multifaceted. We are not just one way and never the other. But when we look online, a lot of influencers who are profiting off these really harmful rhetorics are portraying this idea that masculinity is this one thing and femininity is this other. Now, if we put ourselves in the shoes of a young person who is learning about these things from influencers in online spaces, perhaps we have entered a bit of an echo chamber about, you know, understanding dating advice or what it is to be a boy growing up. We can really understand how these influencers are profiting off this insecurity. Now, on the left-hand side here, I have a graphic to show that there is an influencer business model, which is what we call it. Now, if anyone has watched the Louis Theroux documentary recently, if you haven't, I would definitely recommend. Someone on there who is very popular in the manosphere world and in kind of young people's worlds right now is a TikToker called Harrison Sullivan, or otherwise known as HS TikToky. Okay, so if you've never heard of this man before, lucky you, probably. He has quite harmful content and quite harmful views, but often they're portrayed as kind of the solution, basically. So he will identify a weakness in his followers, who are often young men and boys, saying things like, you know, you don't have the watch that you want, the car that you want, the girlfriend that you want, the money that you want. He will identify these weaknesses and these insecurities that do come from these gendered pressures, and he will offer a solution. He will say, sign up to my trading group and you will make back 3 times the amount of money in 2 months. Often this does not happen, as we know, and it just ends up making the influencer themselves more rich. But we can understand how, you know, this is really attractive to young people who perhaps feel like they don't have the answers and are feeling insecure. And then they create a very controversial online presence as well. Now, a little bit of education around the algorithm again. The more controversial your videos are that you put out there on TikTok, on Instagram, the more people will interact with them, even if at the start that is people interacting with them in a way that's saying, you know, I really don't agree with this. This is a completely crazy opinion or a really harmful opinion. But the more that people engage with it, the more that the algorithm will push this video onto other people's pages, eventually reaching people who perhaps are quite young, perhaps are already in these echo chambers, who believe, yeah, this is the right opinion. And obviously this person is getting a lot of views, a lot of money, a lot of likes off having this opinion. So I believe it. They often show their fake lifestyle as proof. If we reflect on someone like Andrew Tate, who, you know, we don't even really necessarily speak about with young people anymore. If you haven't heard of Andrew Tate, he was one of the kind of first manosphere influencers out there who has been charged with sex trafficking and being in very abusive relationships as well. But often a lot of the kind of lifestyle that he showed online was fake. The cars were rented, the women were actresses that he'd hired for the day. But we can see as adults, it's quite easy to be critical of these things. For young people, perhaps not so much. Now, for us, our kind of main goal with speaking to young people about these things, and our main tip for parents and carers, is to just really inspire this critical thinking, to get young people to think, is this person trying to sell me something? Is this someone's opinion or a fact that they are giving? Or what is the evidence behind it? And just really allowing them to be critical of what they're seeing online, really develop those skills, can really help kind of dismantle a lot of these harmful views. Now, obviously, young people are not only hearing these harmful rhetorics on TikTok, they are also seeing these things enacted in mainstream pornography. Now, I know kind of as employers or even as parents, it's really difficult to bring up conversations around pornography, but we are seeing a lot of statistics where young people are recreating things that they have seen in pornography, and a lot of testimonies as well. Unfortunately, you know, this is quite a mainstream thing now and can lead to a lot of abuse and a lot of sexual violence as well. But it's important to kind of be aware of how often these gendered pressures that we discussed previously are being heightened and exploited in things like pornography, with someone like Bonnie Blue, or people who are creating apps to kind of tell people that, you know, pornography is tempting you away from being a real man who feeds his family and, you know, is really masculine. Now, I know that this is a really big topic to delve into. So obviously this is a more of an overview of how to kind of understand what's going on in pornography and how this links to domestic abuse, but it's something that we cover a lot more when we give kind of full talks about these things in our charity. So if you're interested, please send any more questions over and we can answer them at the end. And to kind of end on another really big issue that is often coming from this kind of changing landscape of pornography is that these harmful ideas can also lead to things like image-based abuse. Now, we know within the domestic abuse umbrella are things like image-based abuse, and unfortunately now that does not just stop with real images being shared non-consensually, but we are seeing things like the rise of AI image-based abuse, nudifying apps, and deepfakes as well. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is an easy conversation to have with young people, with parents and carers, or with your workplace. But unfortunately, it is a real issue and a real worry for a lot of people that might be surrounding you right now. The more that we can open up these things and have kind of support for each other, the better that we can be equipped to face them and the more educated we are around them.
Okay, so what are some practical tips to kind of take away? The biggest thing that we would say is to be curious, to ask questions. We learn so much about the world of young people because we work with young people. We have these conversations with them. We receive testimonies on our website. Sometimes they will know more about these apps. A lot of the time, probably, they will know more about these things than you do. And it's okay to ask them about it. Be inquisitive, ask them in a non-judgmental way. I think that actually approaching your own kind of child or young person and saying, can you actually teach me like how to use this, or how does this app work? They kind of then feel like, oh, I'm actually teaching my parent or my carer. So I think it really makes them feel a bit more honest, a bit more open. One kind of anecdote that I always love to share is after we delivered our parent and carer training session to a workplace, I had this woman come up to me who told me that she was a mum, she had a daughter, and she said that she herself was in this group chat with other mums and there was a bit of an argument happening. And she actually went to her daughter for support and for help. And she said, look, I don't know what to say. All of this is kicking off. Like, can I just show you kind of what's happening? And her daughter was like, right, mum, give me the phone. Went through the chat, started answering, started helping her. 2 weeks later, her daughter then comes to her and told her that she herself is experiencing online bullying, that she's been adding into these group chats where these boys are making fun of her, asking her to send photos. And she said that she reflected on the fact that I wonder if I hadn't have come to her and shown her what I'm going through, whether or not she would have come to me and spoken to me about this. So it's creating those kind of open spaces, really making young people feel like they can come to us and talk about these things. The earlier, the better. Obviously, we spoke about how we did a big primary school campaign. It's difficult. I think a lot of people feel like they don't want to talk about these topics with really young children because they don't want to tell them about something that they don't know or don't really understand. Obviously, it always needs to be kind of age appropriate. You can think about the tone, that sort of thing. But we always say to parents and carers, would you rather, your children learn about these things in a safe environment, either from you or from experts or from teachers at their school, or would you rather they learn about it online on the internet? Because unfortunately, that is what is happening to a lot of young people. They're not having that prevention education. They're being exposed to these things and they do not have the tools themselves to be able to kind of deal with it and process it. And also demonstrate empathy. This is a whole new way of growing up. I mean, I'm 27 years old. When I was at school, we had Instagram, but it was like black and white pictures of your food. Take me back to that time, honestly. But even then, that was impacting like my friendship groups and the way that we were kind of interacting with each other. So I cannot imagine what it's like to kind of grow up in today's world. So just demonstrating that empathy, wanting to kind of learn more about them, I think is really important. And some practical tips for employers to take away: encouraging these conversations in the workplace. We offer a really kind of detailed parent and carer training to workplaces. If you are interested in that, please do give us an email. We'll share our contact details at the end. I think it's having those dedicated couple of hours of training where you say, we are just going to talk about this topic and anyone can ask any question that they might. Signposting resources. We've got so many resources that we can share, that you can then share with kind of your employees and with other people as well. And also just stay updated on what your colleagues are experiencing, being really inquisitive, wanting to learn more about kind of the world of their children and kind of young people as well. And as I mentioned beforehand, listing resources to parents and carers. Just got a quote there from a study from the Nationwide Children's Hospital a few years ago. Working parents under 40 are increasingly concerned about children's mental health and are actually more likely to choose employers that have strong mental health benefits. So being those kind of safe and supportive and empowering places for your employees where they feel like they can kind of come and talk about these things and get support for them as well. So kind of very quickly, last couple of minutes here, just showing kind of how we can support what we offer. As I mentioned, we have really detailed parent and carer talks. This is very much like a whistle-stop tour. I appreciate we're probably jumping from topic to topic, but we really wanted to give you an insight into kind of the expertise that we have and the knowledge and the education that we have. So if you are interested, please do get in touch, and we go through it in a lot more detail and give a lot more kind of practical tips and kind of share our best practice as well. And obviously these conversations conversations, they're different depending on every single person. So we make sure the sessions are bespoke, and we can also kind of have a discussion about that as well. Just a quick look into our resources and kind of what these look like. You will be getting a couple of these after. But if you do kind of book onto the training, you'll have access to all of these resources, and also access to our parent and carer community WhatsApp channel, which is a really fantastic place to get very quick weekly updates. We kind of share like new things that are happening within young people's lives, really helpful like tips and tricks, and also great resources as well. So that's pretty much everything. Just got our email address on the screen there. I think we're going to go to a Q&A now. So we'll obviously stick around and answer a lot of questions. But thank you so much. Hope you took something from this, and really hope we've started a really interesting conversation today.
Thank you so much, guys. That was super helpful. And I can see that there have been lots of people sharing resources in the chat as well. So thank you for that. And as Alex mentioned, we're going to be sharing some of these resources in a follow-up email tomorrow as well, so you don't have to remember everything that we've spoken about. We've got a couple of questions in, and I also wanted to ask a question about engaging men and boys in this type of work specifically, because of course, domestic abuse can happen to anyone. Lots of young boys are also experiencing things like sextortion, like being exploited for nudes and things that they've sent to their friends and people online. And so we really do need to involve men and boys in these conversations. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, but also taking the perspective of the workplace, like how can we involve grown men, so to speak, in these issues? Because it's just so important to have those allies there, because I'm guessing boys with these kinds of harmful attitude might not listen as much to women as they would to a male role model. So yeah, over to you on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a really fantastic question, and one that we really like to discuss, because I think whenever you bring up conversations around domestic abuse or online misogyny, there is maybe that kind of preconception that this conversation is only for women and girls, or if you are a man or a boy, you're thinking, I'm not being involved in this conversation. The biggest thing that I always say to them is that at Everyone's Invited, the reason that we name the charity Everyone's Invited is because we are all part of this conversation. In order to kind of see those solutions, see that change happening, we all need to be involved. The way in which we kind of engage men and boys, we are very, very proud to say that our facilitation team is a 50-50 gender split. We have a lot of fantastic male facilitators that come with us and deliver these workshops, these talks. I think it's so helpful to have, you know, different people up there that kind of represent the people in the room, to make it seem like, you know, we're all part of this conversation and kind of engaging them as well. And I think it's just always coming forward with an empathetic way of doing this and way of thinking, always being empathetic. I always make sure that I understand why young boys, especially teenage boys, are feeling really isolated. Are feeling like people are not listening to them. They've got nowhere to go or no one to speak to. And it's so important for us to be those people for them and also empower them, I think is super important.
That's super, super useful. And I think also further to that, there's a question in the chat from someone with young children who are currently young enough to be kept off of social media. But when it comes to slightly older children, and obviously as we move into the world of employment, younger employees, we obviously can't be telling them to not have phones or having social media, etc. So what's kind of your approach to that? I mean, keeping in mind that that might be age dependent, but you know, when should we tell people to not be on social media? Like, how young do they need to be? And what are the guidelines for adults on this? Are there any?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think obviously a massive point of conversation we're having at the moment is around the social media ban, and maybe thinking about banning it for, you know, children under the age of 16. They've obviously done that in Australia, and there's conversations about whether we're going to do it here. It's something that we talk about a lot. And I think for us that it's definitely important to have those conversations around restricting social media and thinking about how it impacts young people when it comes to addiction and things like that. But I also think that making sure we're like pairing it with the education as well is really, really important. Young people are going to use social media, like they are going to find ways around it. Teenagers are really, really smart, especially when it comes to phones and like the internet. So I think we need to maybe have these conversations with them early on, so they don't try to kind of find those loopholes or get around it. Just being told as a teenager, don't do that, you can't do that. If you reflect back on, I guess, like your own experiences, it's like the eye roll of like, well, I'm definitely gonna do that even more so now. So I think maybe speaking to them in a way that's like, I know that maybe you're going to be exposed to these things at some point in your life. Before that happens, I want to have these conversations with you about kind of what you're to expect and what to see there. If we're thinking about children at a really, really young age, it's not saying like showing them things on social media. But as we've kind of mentioned, a lot of what the influencers are preaching just goes back to those kind of gendered pressures. So I think if you just start those like building blocks and talk to them about consent, about boundaries, about gendered pressures, that kind of kind of puts that into their minds that when they do then use social media, if they do, then they've already kind of got that and they're already thinking about it. These apps have been going for like 10 plus years now, and I would say that we've only started to have these conversations in the last 3 to 5 years, so we have some catching up to do, and it feels like an uphill battle, but it is really empowering and really, really kind of motivates me that like this conversation is more important than ever to kind of continue that. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's a specific age. I would just say it's so important to kind of educate them before they get to use it. And it's not to say that, teenagers, it's too late for them now. They're already using these things. You can always have those conversations and kind of use things that kind of engage them, show them things they're seeing, and kind of make it really engaging as well.
I just wanted to
Thank
add
you.
something really quickly, actually, as well. I think, especially for if you're a parent and carer on the call who has young children, or you might be expecting children in the future, um, you can have these conversations early on. I think we spoke earlier about doing them in age-appropriate ways. And I think to speak to some of the work that we're doing a primary schools program at the moment, where we're working with kind of 8 and 9-year-olds. And we are talking to them about things like influence and also like algorithms. But some of them, or a lot of them, might not have TikTok yet, but we can use interesting metaphors. We talk about, going into an ice cream parlor, trying a flavor. The next time you come back, the person remembers you and they say, well, if you liked this, you might like this flavor. So there's ways to introduce them to these topics in a really kind of exciting, fun, friendly way that isn't fear-mongering. And we see that the children are really engaging with it. They enjoy it. They find it fascinating. They're highly switched on, far more than we give them credit for a lot of the time. And so even if you can start to bring in these concepts of how algorithms work, what influence is, why someone might be wanting to sell you something or promote an idea, then as Alex said, when they do go onto the platforms, which inevitably, even if you try and block them from using it, you give them a brick phone, their friend will have a smartphone, they'll start showing them content. At least then they have those mental tools built up to say, oh, okay, I know what this is. This is an algorithm. Or, oh, actually, I remember mum, dad, whoever telling me about the fact that if you like this one video, it might start showing you more things. So, you can have these conversations at a very, very young age in a way that's appropriate. And I think it can feel challenging, but that's why we're here to support. And we've got all of these kind of creative, age appropriate ways to start these conversations really early on. And as Alex said earlier, you'd rather have these conversations in the safe space of your home than, oh, mum, dad, whoever, I've seen this thing that I'm scared about. What is it? As opposed to, oh, mum and dad told me about this thing I've just seen online that's made me worried. I know what it is, and actually I can go and talk to them about it because they've already brought it up to me before. So yeah, I would really encourage as young as possible. It feels scary, but it's so important, and there are so many ways you can go about it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That's super helpful, both of your responses. And I'd like to pick up on a point that Alex, you made about gendered pressures as well, and how that affects men and boys negatively. And that is something that we at IDA also see throughout our work with domestic abuse and
Yeah.
workplaces, because I think still in our minds, even if it's subconscious, I still think that a lot of us associate domestic abuse with a female victim and a male perpetrator, and always with physical violence. But something that we see in our work, because we take a completely gender inclusive approach to domestic abuse, is that so often when men start becoming exposed to those conversations around domestic abuse is something that can happen to anyone. And when they hear stories of other male victims, they start seeing their experiences represented, which in turn makes them reflect upon experiences that they have had. They see themselves as allies in a completely different way. And it's really about framing this issue as something that can happen to everyone. And so it's so important to make sure that all victim survivors recognize themselves in these stories. And so I just really love the approach that you're taking in that way. And we've got lots of different questions coming in here. Just a quick question on the government National Violence Against Women and Girls Strategy, also known as the Freedom from Violence and Abuse Strategy. how that impacts your work. And I'm happy just to give a super quick rundown for those of you who are new to it. The government published that strategy in December of last year. It involves employers throughout the strategy, where employers are very much seen as allies in the whole of society response to domestic abuse. It's got 3 pillars, and the first one does pertain to everyone's invited remit, which is all about preventing domestic abuse and educating young people. The second pillar is taking action on perpetrators, and the last pillar is, of course, supporting victims. So I'm happy to hand the ball back over to the Everyone's Invited team on like how are you engaging with like the policy guidelines on this?
Yeah. So we were somewhat involved, I guess, with the kind of not creation of it, but I think the work that Everyone's Invited does back 6 years ago or 5 years ago, actually, when we kind of first blew up all over social media, we did a big kind of schools list campaign where we kind of named a lot of the schools and the organizations, like education organizations that were mentioned in our testimonies. Ever since then, we've kind of been on, I guess, the government's radar a little bit. We prompted an investigation by Ofsted back in 2021, and we do tend to kind of have quite open conversations with MPs. After our primary school campaign, we actually met with the early years minister and kind of shared them our research and kind of showed them what is happening. As Kristen, you just kind of explained, we kind of fit within, I guess, that first pillar. I think the new strategy amplifies our work and shows the importance of it, the importance of prevention, the importance of education and talking about these issues. I think it's just time will tell about how in which the government are going to go about this. I definitely think that funding needs to be put in place for when it comes to schools, of how they're going to kind of deal with these issues and that sort of thing as well. So yeah, I think it'll be quite interesting to see how that evolves. But I think what we're saying to kind of organizations, to workplaces who are maybe thinking about how this guidance affects them is that you can use us as that resource, is that our training really covers all of those pillars and really helps to educate people about what that new strategy is and kind of shows them kind of what's happening with it and kind of helps them to implement it, I think, within their own cultures. A lot of what we do is that kind of culture shift, culture change, which I think really is what the strategy is overall trying to speak to, is we need to have this kind of culture change and kind of denormalize domestic abuse and sexual violence. So that is a conversation that we really enjoy and we've been doing for the past like 6 years at Everyone's Invited. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we would speak to that.
That's super useful. And I'm also popping in the chat just a quick article that Ida did on what the domestic abuse strategy, the violence against women and girls strategy, means for employers and how employers are expected to be a part of that response. So I've just popped that in the chat super quickly. We are very quickly running out of time, so I just invite my colleague to pop up our end slide and invite people to our upcoming Insight Hour. But I just want to close by saying thank you so much to Alex, to Eleanor, and to Talisker. Everyone's invited for sharing your insights, for sharing your guidance. It's been very illuminating and frankly scary, but it's definitely time that we have these conversations, and the chat has been going off throughout the whole session. So I'm very glad to see that there's so much engagement on this. So just a reminder to all of our attendees that we're going to be posting the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So please feel free to share that within your organizations as IDA members. And we're also going to be sharing those additional resources that Alex mentioned in an email that will help you navigate those conversations around online harms. Our upcoming IDA Insight Hour is going to be on the 7th of July, and we'll be discussing the use of language when we talk about domestic abuse, both in general, but in the workplace specifically. And so we're popping a link in the chat where you can sign up to that. We really appreciate your feedback on these sessions. So if you have a couple of minutes, please scan the QR code to let us know your thoughts on this Insight Hour. And yeah, thank you very, very much to our speakers. This has been fab. And have a great day, everyone.